Hello and welcome to this special Faber Members Fiction Showcase. My name is Alex Bowler and I am the publisher at Faber. I'm here for just a minute to introduce proceedings. We're about to hear from 6 authors. They each represent the mold-breaking excellence we seek in fiction at Faber. These are writers whose books carve new pathways on the literary map and whose writing, I think, has the power to carve fresh and lasting marks in our hearts and in our minds, broadening our range of sympathy and altering our thoughts. They are, in order of appearance, Prix Goncourt winner Leïla Slimani, who will introduce you to her first historical novel, The Country of Others. Sarah Hall, twice winner of the BBC Short Story Prize, who will be reading from her just published and hugely acclaimed novel, Burnt Coat. Claire Keegan, one of Ireland's most admired writers, reads from her singular wintry tale, Small Things Like These. And Somerset Maugham Award winner and Granta Best Young British novelist Helen Oyeyemi invites you on a fabulous train journey in pieces. We also have the joy of introducing 2 new Faber writers to you. Jo Browning Rowe, whose surpassing debut, A Terrible Kindness, will be published in January 2022, and Ashley Hickson-Lovence, author of Your Show, coming in April 2022. Each writer will tell you a little more about their book and read for you too, but it's my job as the good publisher to remind you that all books are available to buy now, except A Terrible Kindness and Your Show, which are, of course, available to pre-order. Okay, so over the next 40 minutes or so, you're going to meet mongooses and embalmers. You're going to meet compromise men and visionary artists. But before we do, I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to engage with and support the work of these magnificent writers, for your support of what we do at Faber, and for joining us and sharing in an abiding commitment to great writing and great ideas. Okay, thank you. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to this special Faber Members Fiction Showcase. My name is Alex Bowler and I am the publisher at Faber. I'm here for just a minute to introduce proceedings. We're about to hear from 6 authors. They each represent the mold-breaking excellence we seek in fiction at Faber. These are writers whose books carve new pathways on the literary map and whose writing, I think, has the power to carve fresh and lasting marks in our hearts and in our minds, broadening our range of sympathy and altering our thoughts. They are, in order of appearance, Prix Goncourt winner Leïla Slimani, who will introduce you to her first historical novel, The Country of Others. Sarah Hall, twice winner of the BBC Short Story Prize, who will be reading from her just published and hugely acclaimed novel, Burnt Coat. Claire Keegan, one of Ireland's most admired writers, reads from her singular wintry tale, Small Things Like These. And Somerset Maugham Award winner and Granta Best Young British novelist Helen Oyeyemi invites you on a fabulous train journey in pieces. We also have the joy of introducing 2 new Faber writers to you. Jo Browning Rowe, whose surpassing debut, A Terrible Kindness, will be published in January 2022, and Ashley Hickson-Lovence, author of Your Show, coming in April 2022. Each writer will tell you a little more about their book and read for you too, but it's my job as the good publisher to remind you that all books are available to buy now, except A Terrible Kindness and Your Show, which are, of course, available to pre-order. Okay, so over the next 40 minutes or so, you're going to meet mongooses and embalmers. You're going to meet compromise men and visionary artists. But before we do, I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to engage with and support the work of these magnificent writers, for your support of what we do at Faber, and for joining us and sharing in an abiding commitment to great writing and great ideas. Okay, thank you. Enjoy.
My name is Leïla Slimani, and I'm the author of The Country of Others. The Country of Others is the story of Mathilde, a young woman from Alsace, who meets a man, a soldier called Amin. He comes from Morocco and liberates the village where Mathilde lives at the end of Second World War. And I'm going to read a passage about a moment where Mathilde arrives in Morocco, and she arrives in the family of Amin with her mother, his mother, Leila, and his sister, Selma, and she's going to live for 2 years and a half in the house in the Medina, in the little city of Meknes. In the letters she wrote to her sister, Mathilde always lied. She said that her life was like a novel by Karen Blixen or Alexandra David-Néel or Pearl Buck. In each missive, she would invent adventures where she came in contact with the ingenious people who were tender or superstitious. She described herself wearing boots and a hat, riding aloof on an Arab thoroughbred. She wanted Irene to be jealous. She wanted each word to be torture to her. She wanted her sister to die of envy, to be enraged. Mathilde wanted vengeance on his tall, strict, authoritarian sister, who had always treated her like a child and often taken pleasure in publicly humiliating her. Feather-brained Mathilde, shameless Mathilde, Irene called her, without any love or indulgence. Mathilde had always thought that her sister had failed to understand her, that she'd held her prisoner to a tyrannical affection. When she left for Morocco, when she left behind their village, their neighbors, and the future that had been promised to her, Mathilde's first feeling was one of triumph. To begin with, she wrote enthusiastic letters describing her life in the house in the Medina. She emphasized the mysteriousness of Berima's alleys, exaggerated the filthiness of the street, the noise and the stink. One of the nuns at the school gave her a little book about Meknes, with reproduction of engravings by Delacroix. She put these yellow pages on a table and tried to steep herself in it. She memorized certain especially poetic passages by Pierre Loti and marveled at the thought that the writer had slept only a few miles from there, that his eyes too had seen the walls and pools of the Agdal Gardens. She told her sister about the embroiderers, the boilermakers, the wood turners who sat cross-legged in their underground shops. She told her about the processions of guilds and associations in Place El Hadim and the parade of seers and healers. In one of her letters, she devoted almost a whole page to a description of a bone setter's shop that sold hyena skulls, dried crows, hedgehog's feet, and snake venom. She thought this would impress Irene and her father, and that they, upstairs in their bourgeois house, would envy her for having sacrificed boredom to adventure, comfort to exoticism. Everything in this landscape was unexpected, different to what she had known before. She would have needed new words, a whole vocabulary, free of the past to express her feelings, the light so bright that you lived light through squinting eyes, to describe the awe she felt day after day when faced with so much mystery, so much beauty. Nothing here was familiar, not the color of the trees or the sky, not even the taste that the wind left on her tongue and lips. Everything had changed. During the first months in Morocco, Mathilde spent a lot of time behind the little desk that her mother-in-law had put in their room. The old woman was touchingly deferential towards her. For the first time in her life, Leila was sharing her home with an educated woman. Whenever she saw Mathilde bend over her brown writing papers, she felt an immense admiration for her daughter-in-law. She told her family to be quiet in the corridors and forbade Selma from running in the house. She also refused to let Mathilde spend her day in the kitchen because she believed it was not a suitable place for a European woman capable of reading newspaper and novels. So Mathilde stayed in her room and wrote. But it rarely gave her much pleasure because Each time she started describing a landscape or recounting a lived experience, she felt cramped by her own vocabulary. She kept bumping against the same dull, heavy words and perceived in a vague way that language was a limitless playground whose vast panoramas frightened and overwhelmed her. There was so much to say, and she wished that she was Maupassant, so she could describe the yellow that covered the walls of the Medina, so she could bring to life the young boys who played in the street, or the women who glided past like ghosts enveloped in their white haik. She summoned an exotic vocabulary that she felt certain could please her father. She wrote about razia, fellah, jinn, and multicolored serige.
My name's Sarah Hall, and I'm going to talk about my new novel, Burnt Coat, and read a short extract from it. So really, Burnt Coat tells the story of Edith, who is a land artist working with large-scale pieces in burnt wood. And Edith's come towards the end of her life at the beginning of the novel, and she's looking back over her life, remembering the relationships that formed her and how she became the artist that she became. And part of the story includes surviving a pandemic. She actually retains the virus, and the virus is putting itself back together inside her as she starts writing the story. She knows she's going to die from it ultimately. But I started writing this novel on the first day of the lockdown in March 2020, and was writing it every morning very early. In some ways, it was a response to what was going on and all the uncertainty and the fear. In other ways, it was trying to look around the corners of the crisis and try and figure out how we make sense of events like that, and the uncertainty and the fear of our mortality. So it's a somewhat dark novel. It takes us back into the kind of eye of the storm of the pandemic, but also it's quite expansive, I hope, and it just tells the story of humans trying to connect with each other and make sense of everything bad that they face and find a kind of resilience within the self. So I'll read a short extract. This is from early in the novel when Edith is thinking back to her mother and her mother's illness and the way that that shaped her life and who she would become. When I was 8, my mother died and Naomi arrived. My father still lived with us then. We had a house at the edge of town on one of the steep streets that lead up to the beacon, from which the interior mountains can be seen. It was a few days before Christmas. The summits were snow-capped and the air was cold and paper-thin. We were shopping for gifts and my father had brought the car. The doll's house I wanted was very large, too big to carry, so I was sure it would be bought. My mother had been complaining all day of a headache. Every shop we went into made her wince. These lights are so bright. She kept dragging her feet and sitting down, rubbing her forehead. We'd been to the old civic library and, unusually for her, she'd borrowed no books. My father was annoyed. Why did you come out with a migraine? Do you want to go home? On the walk back to the car, she stumbled. My father was walking a little ahead to start the car and turn on the heating. He did not see. She lost her balance and fell to the pavement, kneeling for a moment in the slush, then leaning over and sitting. Adam, she called, where is Edith? Is she there? She sounded very calm. Her words were slow. Adam, I can't see her. I thought she was starting an interesting game. She could be very silly and playful. I'm not over here, Mummy, I said, walking round behind her, and I'm not over here. She held up a hand carefully, touched the air. I can't see. I squatted down in front of her, stared, moved my head around. Her eyes did not follow. One iris seemed like a black planet. Dad, I called. My father walked back to us. Move out of the way, he said. What's going on, Naomi? Why are you sitting there getting filthy? She raised her arms and my father took hold and hauled her up. When he let go, she swayed and sagged again. He walked her across the car park, opened the door of the Volvo and helped her onto the back seat. With every step, she lost power, like a toy running out of battery. She lay quietly on the red leather, her eyes wide and empty. "Get in the front," he told me. This was the first time I'd been allowed in the passenger seat. I clicked the metal seatbelt into its lock. It was baggy, set for an adult. My father started the car and drove unhurriedly, stopping at the traffic lights. For some reason, I thought we were just going home. I kept turning to look behind. My mother was breathing rapidly, her eyelids beginning to droop. She tried to talk, but the words were babyish sounds. There was a clicking sound in her gullet. I looked again, and her face was in a pool of lumpy liquid. "Mum's been sick. She's being sick." "Okay, thank you, Edith," my father said. I was not scared. Nobody in the car seemed scared by what was happening. "Now, turn around and sit down." He drove to the infirmary, pulled up to the main emergency door and put on the handbrake. "Stay here," he said to me. "I want to come in too." "No," he said. "But I want to come with Mummy." He reached across the gear stick and smacked me on the top of the legs, an awkward pluffing whack that stung through my skirt and tights. And then he got out of the car, walked into the hospital and came out with a porter and a wheelchair. They slid Naomi from the back seat, lifted her into the chair, and I watched her being pushed inside, her body listing over. My eyes were watering, the tears refracted everything, and for a moment there were two leaning women in two wheelchairs. I blinked and one was gone. The car smelled sour. The passenger window bloomed coldly under my palm. An ambulance pulled up next to the car and the paramedics unloaded a stretcher. When my father came back, he did not apologise. I said nothing as he moved the car to a parking space. He steered me silently inside the building, his hand pressing between my shoulder blades. I was given children's books by the receptionist. "You look like a clever girl," she said. "I bet you can read all by yourself." I listened to her speaking to the doctors, speaking to my father, speaking into the phone. They were planning to move my mother to another hospital as quickly as possible. While my father was in the toilet, I slipped over to the receptionist and asked if I could see my mother. "Oh, no, Poppet, you can't. She's very sick. They have to do an operation." "What's wrong with her?" I asked. "Is it her headache?" The receptionist nodded, looking pleased as if I'd answered a school question right. "Yes, Poppet, she's got a blood clot on the brain. Oh, here we are." The sound of the helicopter approaching was unmistakable, the furious blades, air thumping beside the building as it landed. Suddenly, I realised everything was serious. Helicopters were used to rescue climbers who'd fallen from the ridges. They were used to save lives. For a minute, I thought we would all be going, and I was lit by excitement and fear. I'd never flown before. But almost immediately, the helicopter lifted again, even louder, it seemed, its rotors whining, a blaze of deafening noise. Soon it was a faraway drone. My father took me home and made toast and asked me to go to bed. "I need you to be a big girl, Edith." I lay looking at the luminous stars stuck to my bedroom ceiling. In the morning, he told me my mother had been airlifted to Newcastle and a surgery performed. She would have to spend several weeks in hospital. It was a very complicated operation. They've had to do some things that mean she won't be herself for a while. She might not even know who you are. He was wearing the same clothes as the day before. His eyes were puffy. His whole face seemed puffy, the features gathering closely together inside it. "Yes, she will know who I am," I said. He shook his head. "She's unconscious. Christine's mum's going to look after you today." We spent Christmas, just the two of us, miserably eating mince pies. The tree was undecorated, only its smell was festive and reassuring. There was no doll's house. My father had hastily bought me a coat. The tag was still in it. On Boxing Day, he drove over to the hospital again. I was made a fuss of by Christine's parents, given chocolates and milk. Christine asked if my mum was going to die. I lied and told her that I'd ridden in the helicopter. When my father arrived to pick me up, I heard him speaking quietly to Christine's mother as I collected my shoes and coat. "It's like Frankenstein," he said. "It's absolutely horrendous." Every few days he made the journey across the country. I kept asking when I could see her. "Not yet," was all he'd say. "She's not well. She doesn't remember." On my first visit to the rehabilitation centre, my mother was sitting at a table, drawing a picture. There was a strip of stubble in her hair containing a vast raised caterpillar scar. One side of her face seemed pulled back and lifted. I stood in the doorway, too scared to approach. "Go on," my father said. "You wanted to come. I'll get a coffee." He was not looking at my mother, and he hadn't said hello to her. He walked away down the corridor. My mother didn't seem to notice me. She had on pale blue pyjamas with white snowflakes that made her look younger. A nurse entered the room behind me. "Oh, you must be Edith. Your mummy's been missing you. Come in." She walked me to the table, pulled out a chair for me. I sat. The nurse gently placed a scarf around my mother's head, covering the curved purple welt, and tied it at the back. "There we go." But I couldn't unsee the awful wound. The picture was childish, a tree or a figure. My mother seemed confused about the line she was making, which direction it could continue in. I took the pencil from her. She looked at me. Her expression was blank and curious, like a bird assessing an item on the ground. I finished the line, drew a nest on the branch with spotted eggs inside. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, popping wetly. With concentrated, almost physical effort, she said, "Al-Nami." I looked at the nurse, who smiled. "What is she saying?" I asked. The nurse put her hands on my mother's shoulders and stopped the swaying motion that had begun to increase. "She's introducing herself. She's saying, 'I'm Naomi.'"
This is a short novel called Small Things Like These. It's the story of a coal man named Bill Furlong, set in the town of New Ross in County Wexford, Ireland. And the story is set in the winter of 1985 and concludes on Christmas Eve after Furlong gets a haircut at the barber's in town. And I just thought, by way of introduction, that I would read the short opening chapter. In October, there were yellow trees. Then the clocks went back the hour, and the long November winds came in and blew and stripped the trees bare. In the town of New Ross, chimneys threw out smoke, which fell away and drifted off in hairy, drawn-out strings before dispersing along the quays. And soon the river Barrow, dark as stout, swelled up with rain. The people, for the most part, unhappily endured the weather. Shopkeepers and tradesmen, men and women in the post office and the dole queue, the mart, the coffee shop and supermarket, the bingo hall, the pubs and the chipper, all commented in their own ways on the cold and what rain had fallen, asking what was in it, and could there be something in it? For who could believe that there again was another raw, cold day? Children pulled their hoods up before facing out to school, while their mothers, so used now to ducking their heads and running to the clothesline or hardly daring to hang anything out at all, had little faith in getting so much as a shirt dry before evening. And then the nights came on and the frosts took hold again, and blades of cold slid under doors and cut the knees off those few who still knelt to say the rosary. Down in the yard, Bill Furlong, the coal and timber merchant, rubbed his hands, saying if things carried on as they were, they would soon need a new set of tires for the lorry. She's on the road every hour of the day, he told his men. It could soon be on the rims. And it was true. Hardly had one customer left the yard before another arrived in, fresh on their heels, or the phone rang, with almost everyone saying they wanted delivery now or soon, that next week wouldn't do. Furlong sold coal, turf, anthracite, slack and logs. These were ordered by the hundredweight, the half hundredweight, or the full ton or lorry load. He also sold bales of briquettes, kindling, and bottled gas. The coal was the dirtiest work and had in winter to be collected monthly off the quays. 2 full days it took for the men to collect, carry, sort, and weigh it all out back in the yard. Meanwhile, the Polish and Russian boatmen were a novelty going about town in their fur caps and long buttoned coats, with hardly a word of English. During busy times like these, Furlong made most of the deliveries himself, leaving the yard men to bag up the next orders and cut and split the loads of felled trees the farmers brought in. Through the mornings, the saws and shovels could be heard going hard at it. But when the Angelus bell rang at noon, the men laid down their tools, washed the black off their hands, and went round to Kyo's, where they were fed hot dinners with soup and fish and chips on Fridays. The empty sack cannot stand, Mrs. Kyo liked to say, standing behind her new buffet counter, slicing up the meat and dishing out the veg and mash with her long metal spoons. Gladly the men sat down to thaw out and eat their fill before having a smoke and facing back out into the cold again.
I'm Helen Oyeyemi, and I'm offering for your consideration my novel Pieces, which is primarily a train book, which follows Otto and Xavier, a couple who have recently decided to share a surname, and they're celebrating this by taking a train journey that's gifted to them by their aunt, or mainly Xavier's aunt, Toyonchi. In writing it, I was thinking, I didn't just want to write a train book or a honeymoon story. I wanted to include some existential concerns. And also I had a general, what if you broke up with someone 4 years ago and they didn't accept your breakup for that whole time and then joined you on a train journey to tell you all about yourself? So there's some elements of that too. And there are also mongooses, not one, but two. And I'm going to read to you from a passage that tells us a little something about one of the mongooses. And as I said, Toyonchi is the aunt who gives them the train ticket, and she has her own reasons for sending them off, but she's trying to make it about the mongoose. Toyonchi wanted a special point of reminding us that Arpad the 30th was getting on for 6 years old, and that it was very important for mongooses to travel before they reach middle age. Otherwise, they get narrow-minded. This discussion took place in Toyonchi's study, where Arpad's favourite sandbox was located. We took a look at him and at the various bits of carefully polished treasure he was in the process of hiding. Back when it had just been me and Arpad in my studio flat, he hadn't had many high-value items to look after. A bronze-coloured bottle top here and there, perhaps. But ever since Arpad the 30th had become part of the Shin household, there were solid gold bracelets, diamond stud earrings, and jade rings. Arpad was clearly delighted with his hoard. I also saw signs of self-consciousness, which were fairly understandable given that we'd all stopped talking and were now staring at him. Arpad Montague the 30th, well worth staring at. Notable features include his coat of platinum fur and the exceptionally well-sculpted length of his paws and feet. The grace of those alone might convince you Nijinsky's been reincarnated in mongoose form. Some snootiness of manner might be justified, and yet you could search the universe and fail to find a friendlier creature, or a fellow more willing to hear both sides of a story and disperse the benefit of the doubt in both directions if needed. During my more rational hours of the day, 11 in the morning, for instance, or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I realise what I sound like when I talk about Arpad. I do realise it, and I know no one should listen to a word I say about him. The trouble is, I see all sorts of stories in that mongoose. He is a friend of 200 years and more, by which I mean that he is his very own self, and also every fit of laughter his predecessors have induced in mine, every ounce of liability, bewilderment, solace, simple certainty. Arpad the 30th, the pick of Arpad the 29th's litter. And who was Arpad the 29th? Not only the most sardonic bosom friend of my teens and early 20s, but my mum's favourite of Arpad the 28th's offspring. The 28th of our Arpads would close his eyes and quiver ardently upon hearing certain lines of Ulysses. Tennyson's biggest fan. Or was he? Lieselotte, my mum, pointed out that Arpad the 28th may well have been trolling Martha, also my mum. Martha's the Montague descendant, and she's also one of those literature professors with a postmodernism or goodbye stance. She finds Victorian literature cloying at best, so all you have to do is recite a few lines of mid to late 19th century poetry before her body language indicates she isn't coping. It would have been the easiest thing in the world for Arpad the 28th to pick up on that. I could write a book about the Arpads, but I'll keep it to a couple of paragraphs. Arpad I appeared one night in my great-grandfather's nursery when he was a very small boy in Kuching, Borneo. I'm sure almost no one deludes themselves that all their ancestors were decent. Pick a vein, any vein, mud mixed with lightning flows through, an unruly fusion of bad blood and good. It's not easy to imagine what would make someone hate a little boy, or more probably the parents of that little boy, enough to place not one but 2 vipers in his cot. There we were, harmless government administrators on perfectly good terms with everybody, and all of a sudden some wrong un came after our only son. Doesn't quite ring true to me. Many surmises could be made and have been made, but when it came right down to it, you had this switchback-fanged couple bearing down on a youngster too stunned to even make a sound. 2 against 1 isn't fair, but really it was even simpler than that. The mongoose is the enemy of the serpent. Arpad I wasn't interested in saving anyone's life. Leaping into that writhing mass and slashing away until it fell still, that's what she was interested in. End of. Or not quite. A 3rd-floor nursery can't really be described as a natural habitat for a mongoose. I almost want to say that someone must have brought her there, but having lived with Arpads all my life, I know that Arpad I could just have easily been out looking for trouble and found her own way into that nursery. Basically, it's like that song, if we don't know by now, we will never, ever, 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 ever know. Even as a toddler, that forebear of mine was the solid type. The mongoose had bolted, but someone had been reading the child-potted biographies of wise warriors. One name had got stuck in his head, and he knew it must belong to the mongoose. He waited until he could be heard over the nursery maid's hysterical screams. Then he murmured, Arpad, over and over, with his pudgy little arms outstretched. And once Arpad I had made herself presentable, she came to see him. Toyonchi hadn't heard this legend. There was never the right time or the right sort of atmosphere in which to bring it up. When people ask about Arpad the 30th or about his mother, it's always been simpler just to say, yeah, domestic mongooses are the new cats and dogs. It'll catch on, you'll see. Thanks for listening.
I'm Jo Browning-Rowe, author of A Terrible Kindness. My novel came to life through conversations I had with 2 embalmers, by then in their 70s, who as young men had gone in 1966 as volunteers to the Aberfan disaster, when a mining waste tip, loosened by rain, had careered down the Welsh mountainside and onto a small village primary school. The story follows one young embalmer's life and how he deals with his own aftermath from the disaster, and is of course at times very sad. But there is also a lot of music, laughter and love. The novel begins and ends at Aberfan, but in between are 17 years of William's life, as a boy chorister in Cambridge, a trainee embalmer in London, and later, after the disaster, he helps with a choir for the homeless, reconnecting with his severed musical roots, which offers him a path to his own healing. I'm going to read to you from the opening pages of my story. October 1966. Something dreadful happened in Wales yesterday, but it was William's graduation, and so he's been distracted. He left the Thames College of Embalming with outstanding and unprecedented results. Tonight is the annual social highlight for the Midlands chapter of the Institute of Embalmers, the Ladies' Night Dinner Dance in Nottingham. To celebrate William's success and equip him for his first social highlight, Uncle Robert has bought him a dinner suit and bow tie. Aged 19, William is a little excited but mostly terrified by the news from his uncle that their president, David Melling, is going to ensure that a fuss is made of him. 50 miles from his home in Birmingham, William would spend his first night in a hotel, the Lace Market, along with Uncle Robert and business partner Howard. Sharing a table with them are the Strouds, an undertaking family from Solihull, and on William's left, the only other person his age, Gloria Finch, also from an undertaking family, with whom William lodged during his year at college in Stepney. Glorious Gloria, whom William has loved from their first conversation a year ago, drinking cocoa in the Finch's cosy galley kitchen, while her parents watched telly in the lounge. Tonight, she's wearing a tight black dress with sequins, through which her whole body seems to be winking at William. Swanky is how Robert described the event to William, and he wasn't exaggerating. The bright, trussed figures of the women, with sparkling necks, wrists and fingers, are vivid against the men's solid black and white. Though Howard's cufflinks are sparkly too, Howard loves an event, loves a fancy do. He helped to choose William's dinner jacket and dicky-po, and stood behind him to demonstrate tying the tie, his broad cheek brushing occasionally against William's face, making them both giggle. William takes in the ballroom's high ceiling, the pink and white embellishments, looping and twisting in and out of the alcoves. Giant diamond teardrops and swooping strings of chandelier glass hang imperious and heavy over the tables. There may be more knives and forks on either side of William's plate than in their entire cutlery drawer at home. He must work from the outside in. The knife is weighty, the white linen napkin that he unfolds and puts over his knees surprisingly stiff. It's been a while since William has seen such dressed-up tables and people. Not since he was a boy chorister in Cambridge and sang at formal hall or one-off special occasions. He quickly pushes those memories away, but not before registering a difference. Even as a 10-year-old, William understood that those seated at high table hadn't arrived, they'd always been there, and opulence was no treat. Tonight's excitement is palpable. So too the satisfaction of these embalmers who have earned an evening of opulence, a reward for their dedication to exacting, important work, the work of their grandfathers, their fathers, and for some, their sons. After the hard graft and study of the last year, William is happy to take his place in a world in which you do a difficult but honourable job to the very best of your ability, most of the time for little reward beyond your own sense of satisfaction. But every now and then, you get to pat each other on the back and go swanky. Thank you.
My name is Ashley Hickson-Lovence, and I'm the author of Your Show, a novel about the life and career of Uriah Yuri Rennie, a trailblazing, pioneering football referee, the first and still the only Black football referee to referee in the Premier League. It charts his journey from growing up in rural Jamaica, moving to impoverished Sheffield as a teenager, and trying to succeed in a sport that was predominantly white, that was never really giving him a chance, that didn't really believe in his abilities and his capabilities to be the very best. The book follows some of the dramatic events of going face to face with some of the heroes of football down the years, like David Beckham, Roy Keane, and Alan Shearer. But despite its obvious football themes, this is a book for a wide literary readership. For fans of Max Porter and David Peace, it's poetic, it's thrilling, it's tender, it's ambitious, but hopefully it's a very good read. I'm now going to read a small part in which it details Yuri as a young man going for a run in his local area, the Wyburn in Sheffield. The title of this chapter is 1977. Quick run around the block. Fitness is key. Head starting to feel light already. Only a mile deep. You keep your head down, eyes to the floor, skip over dog shit. You're leaning a little to the left, swaying to the edge of the curb. Spirits are high in the city because it's the Queen's Silver Jubilee, and every window and shop front and little kids' face is red, white and blue. There ain't no black in the Union Jack. Street parties have been planned, sausage rolls and pork pies and cups of tea using the fine china for the adults and polystyrene ones for the kids. In the backdrop, like a headache, the forge from the steel factory pounding. The lava orange sparks are blinding even with mask on. Through the eruption, what the metal will become is not yet clear. Sheffield steel, 1,000 types bent and molded with gloved dirt black hands, high-grade steel of the highest degree of purity, bent and molded in fire-red furnaces. Turn into Norfolk Park, jog through the gates, spot a tramp sitting on the bench up ahead. He looks at you all rough as you run past. The cheap cider got him feeling woozy. Oi, you lad, you an owl or a blade? You don't respond. It ain't Derby Day. He don't need to know. You're fluent in football, you play football, you coach football, play away games and come back to home-cooked meals bunged in the oven to keep warm, and George Best is drinking again and Clyde Best don't play for West Ham no more, and everyone's already getting excited for the World Cup next year in Argentina. The boundaries of Bramall Lane have been pushed in. The cricket has gone. Football is king. Round here, football is life. Football means freedom. Football means keepy uppies to 100. A bent crossbar drawn on alleyway walls with heavy-handed white paint. Shirts versus skins till sunset. 5-a-side. Wembley, 2 in net till tea time. Your dad's like cricket and Viv Richards, but this ain't Jamaica no more. None of you support Liverpool, but you all chant, you'll never walk alone when you win. If this is the Commonwealth dream, somebody wake us up already, you heard an uncle say at the 56 bus stop. Don't think about running. You're trying not to think about running, but you can't stop thinking about running. East Bank Road, building works, you're cuffing up the dust. You see the claw of the digger curled like a cat's paw, nudging old chimneys over. Most of the rabbit hutch pebble dash houses have been condemned. And there's that lad, you know, lives on the manor like enemy territory. Saw him the other day in Woolies. You run faster, work muscles harder, thighs and groins and hamstrings. You have a sweaty belly. Your feet creep in and out of view beneath you, right one, then left. Your thumbs are sticking up and you're not sure why. Your fists are clenched and you're not sure why. Why is he looking at you like that? You ain't no nignog. This ain't Love Thy Neighbour. You're not Rudolph Walker's lad. KBW painted over with the wrong colour paint. You drink the wind up like it's water. It's nice, but not so fresh. Really running you are now, each step feeling a little too heavy. The surface underfoot tough. Bits of brick from the building site have been rolled onto the pavement, rocks and rubble, men with hard hats who read the sun and smoke B&H till the morning haze blows over. But it won't. Your legs